Thank you for joining us for the GI Huddle for part one of our Sweden focus. Last month, we brought you a four-part in-depth series on problem gambling, and you can find all the episodes on our GI Huddle section. This month, though, we'll be taking a closer look at Sweden, a key region within the global gaming landscape. Kicking off today, we'll be speaking with Gustaf Hoffstedt, Secretary General of the BOS, about the Swedish online market, which has created non-stop headlines since its re-regulation in January 2019. Hi, Gustaf. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Tim. It's great to be here today.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. And we're going to talk about plenty of things in Sweden because it's such a thought-provoking, but I'd say controversial market at the moment as well. I think by way of intro, maybe we could start, you could tell us a bit about your role with the BOS and what your organization does.
Well, we are a simple trade industry body. We represent our members, of course, and our members are online gambling operators as well as suppliers. So the lion's portion is B2C, but we also have approximately 25% or so of our members are game developers, B2Bs.
Sure, yeah, and we're obviously here to talk about Sweden. I think it's impossible for anyone in our industry not to have heard about what's been going on in Sweden the last couple of years. But just in case anyone hasn't, I was hoping you could give us a kind of an overview of the state of play in the Swedish online market right now, and exactly why there's so many headlines, and there's this party saying this, and then this, that the regulator, the government. Yeah, if you could just sort of take it away and tell us the overall state of play.
Yeah, it's been a bumpy road. We have been, and that's very positive, we have been abandoning the monopoly system. We came out as second in place from a Scandinavian point of view. So 1st of January 2019, Sweden launched its licensing system, and it was bumpy until that point as well, for a number of reasons. One was that the channelization in Sweden at that time, prior to the re-regulation, was actually under 50%. So there weren't that many Swedish punters that actually obeyed the rules at that time. But anyway, Sweden launched its licensing system 2 years ago, and what came as a surprise to me and many other stakeholders was that when the system was launched, that was certainly not the end of the willingness from the government to add new measures to the gambling regulation. Quite the contrary. So the licensing system that we saw 1st of January 2019 was something that the government and to some extent the gambling authority, but definitely the government, they were only too eager to change the system they themselves launched 1st of January 2019. So the kind of gambling legislation that we see today in Sweden, it differs so much from the licensing system that was sold in to the license holders prior to the re-regulation. That is the main reason for the bumpy road and the articles that we have seen in so much media regarding the Swedish gambling regulation lately.
Yeah, something you've talked about in the last few months is obviously since the pandemic has come in, this has led to even further restrictions. It's under the guise of specifically due to kind of COVID-19 and more players sitting at home during lockdown. What are the kind of standout restrictions that have been placed recently? Obviously, there's weekly deposit limits and bonusing limits. Can you kind of talk us through the main sort of ways in which the government and the lawmakers have sort of restricted operators?
Yeah, the government took this initiative last spring, and they according to them, they couldn't await facts to prove that their awareness were in fact correct, and it proved out to not be correct. So what we know for a fact is that the Swedish gambling didn't differ the way the government expected it to do, namely a dramatic increase regarding online casino gambling. However, as in any jurisdiction, sports betting obviously fell to a very low level, since there weren't that many matches to bet on. But in Sweden, I don't know how big it is in UK and other jurisdictions, but horse betting in general and trotting in particular is hugely popular here. And since the trotting arenas were open all the time, that kind of betting exploded. But despite that, the government decided to not add any kind of additional measures towards horse betting, whereas online casino, as the usual suspect, received a number of additional hefty restrictions, namely the ones that you mentioned, the deposit limit, the weekly deposit limit, and also a bonus restriction that more or less take away the possibility to offer bonuses at all to the punters. And as a comment to that, we haven't seen any channelization numbers actually after the launch of those new additional measures. But prior to the launch of them, channelization regarding online casino in Sweden was approximately 75%. So even prior to those additional measures, every fourth Swedish krona leaked out of the licensing system. And I wouldn't get too surprised if the leakage out of the legal licensing system is even greater today. I believe it's likable that our system continues to leak in an increasing way.
This difference between regulation for horse racing and betting and online casino, you've talked about it before. Can you maybe tell our viewers more about why there's this difference, and I think some reasons you've put before in the past on behalf of the BOS?
Well, gambling and gambling regulation is almost like the defense industry. It's so political. I assume it's extremely political in almost any jurisdiction, and the government and the state is not just the rule setter, but in too many cases it's also a commercial and an aggressive competitor as a gambling company. And in a Swedish context, regarding the de facto monopoly operator ATG, the state is responsible. The state of Sweden is having the mandate to point out the board majority in that board. So the chairman and a majority of the rest of the board representatives are chosen by the Swedish government. And the Swedish government also owns their own gambling operator, and the largest political party within the government also owns another gambling operator. What I'm trying to say here is that there are mixed reasons for the government to act, whereas I believe, and my association believe, that it would be a much more respectful and a much clearer solution should the state decide to be the legislator and also the verdict, the judge, should anyone trespass those regulations. Whereas today we face a situation when we don't actually always know whether we meet the legislator or perhaps just another competitor.
Mm-hmm, yeah, that sort of political kind of undertone and underbelly is certainly complicates issues. And when you talk about not knowing kind of who may be the judge and who you're dealing with, I guess that raises a topic which a number of CEOs have talked about, a dialogue and a lack of dialogue. And so, for example, when there's fines set out and rulings made, operators don't necessarily say we disagree that we're being fined for this, but they say it wasn't clear in the first place what the rulings actually were. I mean, how would you rate the state of dialogue sort of 2 years on from this re-regulation between the regulator and the necessary stakeholders, and where can you see potential for improvement?
I believe it has already improved because the fines you talk about, they were decided by the SGA, the Swedish Gambling Authority. Well, for just to give you one example, the SGA has taken an initiative to have monthly meetings with us, with the trade association. I fully understand that the SGA, they cannot have monthly or even annually meetings with every operator out there, but they do have on a regular basis meetings with us nowadays. One challenge for them, and obviously for the whole gambling market, is, well, to begin with, proportionality. One operator received an invoice of 100 million Swedish krona, approximately, well, just below 10 million pounds. And for a jurisdiction with approximately 10 million inhabitants, that is, of course, a huge fee. Yeah. And the other fees that have been handed out have been quite close to those sums as well. That is one side of the dilemma. And the other side of the dilemma is, of course, the substantial amount of unlicensed operators that, for obvious reasons, never receive any invoices at all from the SGA. We believe that this has created a climate where it's not that advantage to have a local Swedish license at all, especially since there is this lack in the legislation causing that most of the unlicensed gambling in Sweden is in fact legal. And I don't mean it from the consumer side, because from the consumer side it's always legal to gamble, regardless whether the gambling is unlicensed or licensed. But the problem with the Swedish legislation is that also from the operator side, it is usually, and perhaps I shouldn't disclaim this, but usually it's actually legal also from that perspective. So if you operate from a foreign jurisdiction and you accept Swedish punters, but you do not use the Swedish language and you do not use the Swedish currency, the krona, then it is very likely that your operations are legal, despite the fact that you in practice are targeting the Swedish market. And for most Swedes, especially the young ones, the English language and the euro as currency is not a threshold to be worried about. Most of us buy our shoes and trousers and air tickets and whatever in the English language and with the euro as currency. So that is, of course, a challenge in protecting the channelization in Sweden. And it certainly doesn't help when the SGA is handing out extremely hefty fees to the few license holders that try to stay within the licensing system.
Yeah, there's a number of points you've raised there. Firstly, it's good to hear there's an increased dialogue, at least this period of time onwards. Naturally, that loophole you referred to is quite significant as well. But your mention of channelization, it's something we talk about a lot in this industry, and I think it's fair to be objective and perhaps come from the other side. A question I'd like to put to you is, very recently in the UK, we've kind of had a new debate arising. The regulator and certain charities have talked about the threat of the black market actually being a little bit exaggerated, not necessarily in Sweden, but in the UK. And the main argument is that actually regulated operators aren't protecting players as much as they should. Now, this is obviously just a claim. We're not saying that's exactly the case, but they're saying, regulated companies are just using that as a kind of concept and excuse to kind of avoid tighter regulation. I mean, to that kind of criticism, what would you make of that view?
there is, of course, always room and space to criticize licensed operators, and they shall be criticized whenever they are infringing local regulation, whether that regulation may be British or Swedish or Dutch or whatever. But one thing that is so extremely important for any kind of goal that you want to reach when it comes to gambling regulation is channelization. Because regardless if your focus is on maximizing a commercial company's profitability, or if it is to maximize consumer protection, or if it is to maximize the state's tax income, none of those goals will be reached unless gambling is channelized to the system that the national MPs have decided upon. Channelization is not a consumer protection measure by itself, but no consumer protection is possible without a high channelization. And that is why we talk so much about it, and maybe to an extent that our ears soon will fall off because we are tired of listening to that word. But it is because it's the fundament of everything that you want to achieve, regardless of the perspective, whether you represent a gambling addict association or a commercial gambling operator or the state or whatever. So I do believe that we cannot talk enough about channelization, not just the commercial operators, but anyone, despite what they represent, should pay much attention to that. May I give you one example, Tim, regarding the situation here in Sweden? We have a hugely successful self-exclusion system. It's called Spelpaus. I know that you have a similar system in the UK. The Danes also have a similar system, etc. And approximately 60,000 Swedes have self-excluded them from that system. That's a huge success. Most of those ex-gamblers are probably problem gamblers as well, and they shall not enter any casino or horse trotting arena or anything like that at all. They shall not gamble. So it's a huge success. The problem, and here is the dilemma with the channelization, the problem is that we nowadays receive witnesses from gambling addicts organizations that tell us that well, yeah, it's great that people self-exclude themselves, but 4 out of 5 of our clients, says the gambling addicts associations, gamble anyway outside the licensing system, and since the self-excluding system only is viable for licensed operators, the self-excluding system is well not functioning in the way that we were hoping. So I would strongly go against those stakeholders, regardless whether they are in Sweden or in the UK or wherever they are, that in any way try to minimize the problem of a decreased channelization.
Yeah, I think that's a fair defense, and you've used a really poignant example there. Obviously, the point you mentioned about tax revenue as well, I mean, is central to the argument too, because at the end of the day, even, I know we're talking about Sweden, but just to refer to the UK example, the operators that are often so criticized, you know, are contributing billions in tax revenue for the government, so you know that can't be underplayed. But yeah, like I said, I think that you've certainly explained the points well of the importance of channelization. We talked about a lot of the faults in the market from the operator's point of view, and they've been well documented even before our talk now. In an ideal world, and I know it doesn't exist, but in an ideal world, especially during a pandemic, how does the Swedish online market move forward?
Well, we would focus much more on the duty of care. That is something that the legislator has decided upon, but that hasn't been used enough. So when it comes to consumer protection, I believe that we shall focus much more on the duty of care. And in practice, that means that as you know, any online operator has the possibility to not just monitor whatever the punter is doing, but also what she actually, well, her behavior, but it's also a possibility, and now it's mandatory to offer help to punters that have a behavior that may be a problematic behavior. I believe that is the beauty with online gambling, that our behavior is so in detail monitored compared to in the old world, everything was anonymous and nobody really knew what we were doing. Nowadays, it's not just a KYC process, but also a process where you monitor your exact behavior. Every push on the button on your smartphone is monitored, and that gives us a huge advantage. And I also believe that we haven't seen the end of the possibilities that new knowledge gives us. In the industry and also among scientists, more and more people are talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And it's not science fiction to talk about the possibilities to actually predict behavior that hasn't developed yet. So in a few years, we probably have the possibility to predict a problem gambling behavior even before it has happened, and imagine the possibilities that the legislator, the regulator, but also we in the industry have to protect those vulnerable people to not develop gambling problems when we have such tools in our toolbox. Also in Sweden, well, we have to do something about the channelization, and that is to safeguard the license holders. The way the government has acted during the 2 years cannot stand. The strategy has more or less been to be soft towards unlicensed operators and to be harsh towards licensed operators. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. The consumers are fleeing from the Swedish licensing system. And if nothing is done, we will soon face a situation close to the situation we had prior to the re-regulation, namely that channelization drops below 50%. And I mean, what operator will maintain in such a system? What operator will want to pay licenses, and if they are in breach of those license regulations, pay fees and also pay a 18% tax on that when their competitors continue to offer games without paying tax and without following any kind of regulation regarding bonuses, etc. So we are in desperate need of a governmental change in their perspective or point of view. They have to understand that punishing license holders the way that they are doing today, they have to abandon that road.
Well, Gustaf, thank you very much for your time and all your insight. Plenty of food for thought, and it sounds like it's going to be a busy year again for the Swedish online market, hopefully a positive one. And we wish you and your trade body all the best with the fight, I guess, the fight for the progression of the market.
Thanks a lot, Tim, and I can't wait to visit England again. I miss also the physical talks with many of my colleagues in England. So let's hope that the pandemic is gone soon.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for watching part 1 of our Sweden focus. For part 2, we're joined by Catena Media founder Eric Bergman.